found that on August 2nd, 2015, while only 20 years old, he gained access and gamed at the Mohegan Sun at Pocono Downs Casino. When asked for identification, Mr. Murros at least once provided false identification while on the gaming floor, and while on the gaming floor, he also played 17 hands of blackjack. As a result of these actions, Mr. Murros was charged with and pleaded guilty to unlawful wagering. He did request a hearing, participated in the hearing, testified essentially that he thought the legal age for gaming was 18. Unfortunately, did not have a good explanation for why he presented a false ID indicating that he was over 21. And as a result of that evidence, the hearing officer found him not to be credible and recommends that, in fact, he be placed on the list for a period of at least 1 year, at which time he can petition for removal from the list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Marlon Jake Murros, placement on the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel, and that Mr. Murros be placed on the exclusion list for at least 1 year, at which time he may petition this board to be removed from the list.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is the report and recommendation pertaining to James Platts. On October 22nd, 2015, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint requesting that Mr. Platts be placed on the board's exclusion list for leaving his 4-year-old unattended in his vehicle in the parking garage at Harrah's Casino while he gamed. A hearing in this matter was held on January 7th, 2016. The Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mr. Platts appeared at the hearing offering evidence. Mr. Platts testified that prior to going to the casino, he dropped off his girlfriend and their children at home. It's noteworthy that the couple had 7 children. And unbeknownst to Mr. Platts, one of his 4-year-old children have fallen asleep in the back of his passenger van. Mr. Platts' girlfriend also testified at the hearing and provided documentary evidence to corroborate her testimony that soon after Mr. Platts left for the casino, she recognized that one of the children were missing. She attempted to call Mr. Platts on his cell phone. The cell phone rang at their apartment because he left it behind. She thereafter subsequently did call Harrah's 5 times so that they could track him down on the floor. That didn't happen. Ultimately, she thereafter called the Chester police, who responded. Sure enough, the child was found sleeping in the back of the car. After hearing this evidence, the report and recommendation issued by the hearing officer found that while Mr. Platts did not knowingly leave his 4-year-old in the car, the hearing officer nevertheless recommended that he be placed on the list for at least 1 year, and that is the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board reject the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding James Platts' placement on the involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel, and that Mr. Platts not be placed on the exclusion list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion is adopted.
The final report and recommendation before the board pertains to Andrew McCallie. In February of 2009, Mr. McCallie pleaded guilty to charges resulting from his part in an illegal sports betting ring operating out of the Borgata Casino in Atlantic City. In 2010, New Jersey placed Mr. McCallie on that jurisdiction's exclusion list for 5 years. He was also placed on the Delaware State Lottery's exclusion list. As a result of his gambling-related criminal conviction and the fact that Mr. McCallie was known to frequent Pennsylvania casinos, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a complaint to place him on the board's involuntary exclusion list. Before the board took that matter up, however, the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Mr. McCallie reached a consent agreement, which the board subsequently approved, placing Mr. McCallie on the exclusion list for 3 years, at which time he could petition for removal from the list. He subsequently did petition for removal from the list after that 3 years ran. And a hearing, OEC continued to object to his removal from the list, and a hearing on his request was held on March 15, 2016. Mr. McCallie provided evidence that he has had no further run-ins with law enforcement since his placement on the list, and he also testified that he has separated himself from the other participants in the sports betting ring. The report and recommendation subsequently issued by the hearing officer recommends that Mr. McCallie be removed from the involuntary exclusion list, and that is the recommendation before the board. It is worth noting that this individual has also sought and been removed from the New Jersey list, having served his 5-year ban in that jurisdiction.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation issued by the Office of Hearings and Appeals regarding Andrew McCallie's petition to be removed from the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And that concludes all matters of the Office of Chief
Thank you,
Counsel.
Doug. Next, we have Sue Hensel, Director of Bureau of Licensing.
Thank you, Chairman Barish and members of the board. Before the board today will be 2 Junket Enterprise license applicants, as well as 934 principal, key, gaming, and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be the consideration of 21 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of a gaming Junket Enterprise license for Chai Ho Lung. The Junket Enterprise is a sole proprietorship based in Connecticut and conducts business in Pennsylvania and Connecticut. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of this company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with the background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the approval of a license for Chai Ho Lung.
Any comments from Enforcement Counsel?
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the Gaming Junket Enterprise license of Chai Ho Lung as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration is the approval of a Gaming Junket Enterprise license for Lion Gaming and Travel Group, LLC. The Junket Enterprise is a limited liability company based in New Jersey and conducts business in Pennsylvania, the Bahamas, Louisiana, Nevada, and New Jersey. The Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement has completed its investigation of this company, and the Bureau of Licensing has provided you with a background investigation and suitability report. I have provided you with a draft order and ask that the board consider the approval of a license for Lion Gaming and Travel Group, LLC.
Comments from Enforcement Counsel?
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Comments from the board? Questions? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the Gaming Junket Enterprise license of Lion Gaming and Travel Group, LLC, as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 2 principal and 2 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Questions, comments from Enforcement Counsel?
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are also temporary principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 3 principal and 11 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving the licenses.
Enforcement Counsel?
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next, there are gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 664 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupation permits, and 220 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Questions or comments from Enforcement Counsel?
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also, there are recommendations of denial for 2 gaming and 3 non-gaming employees. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing the applicants, who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the Board consider a motion approving the denials.
Enforcement Counsel,
Enforcement Counsel continues to request denial in each instance.
questions or comments from the Board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming and non-gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next for your consideration are withdrawal requests for gaming and non-gaming employees. In each case, the permit or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I provided the Board with a list of 16 gaming and 11 non-gaming employee applicant withdrawals for approval. I ask that the Board consider the order approving this list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Counsel,
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
questions or comments from my board members? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
In addition, we have an order to certify the following gaming service providers: Development Management Associates, LLC, Label Right, Inc., and Vollers Excavating and Construction, Inc. I ask that the Board consider the order approving these gaming service provider applicants for certification.
Enforcement Counsel,
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
questions or comments from the Board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration, are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 18 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the Board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Enforcement Counsel,
Enforcement Counsel has no objection.
questions or comments from the Board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
That concludes the Bureau of Licensing's matters.
Thanks, Susan. Next up, Office of Enforcement Counsel.
The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 21 matters for the Board's consideration today, consisting of 2 consent agreements, 6 revocations, 1 suspension, and 12 involuntary exclusions. The first 2 consent agreements that will be presented have been negotiated between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc., doing business as Parks Casino. The matters will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Dustin Miller.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the Board.
Before we begin, I'd like to ask anyone who's going to be addressing the Board this morning, please stand, state, and spell your name for the court reporter and be sworn. Please. Other than the attorney, obviously.
Martin Doyle, MARTIN,
Next.
Gerald Fretz, FRETZ, Director of Security, Parks Casino.
Anthony Franken, FARANCA, General Manager, Parks Casino.
Morning, sir.
Second. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. This first consent agreement arises from an incident of underage gaming at Parks Casino on December 8, 2015. Both the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development and Gaming Act and the regulations promulgated under the Act prohibit a slot machine licensee from allowing persons under the age of 21 to engage in gaming in Pennsylvania casinos. On December 8, 2015, an individual under the age of 21 entered Parks Casino at 9:28 p.m. The individual was 19 years of age at the time of this incident. The individual was asked for identification by a security officer when she entered the casino. After reviewing the individual's identification, the security officer allowed the underage individual on the gaming floor. The individual remained on the gaming floor of Parks Casino for approximately 1 hour and 26 minutes before it was ascertained that she was under the age of 21. The individual played 20 hands of blackjack while on the gaming floor and consumed 1 alcoholic beverage. The underage individual was detected when her husband attempted to use her identification to obtain a cash advance, which showed her to be 19 years old. The underage individual was not criminally charged by Pennsylvania State Police for this incident. On May 17, 2016, the parties entered into a consent agreement to settle this outstanding compliance matter. If approved, this consent agreement will be the 3rd penalty assessed against Parks for violating the Act and board regulations pertaining to underage gaming since its last renewal, and its 8th overall penalty for underage gaming violations. The terms of the agreement include a provision that Parks Casino shall reinforce existing policies and provide training, guidance, and reinforcement to employees to minimize the opportunity for a similar incident to occur in the future. And also, Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. shall pay a total fine of $15,000. Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. shall also pay a fee of $2,500 for costs incurred by the Office of Enforcement Counsel, Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement, and other related staff, which is consistent with the Board's billing policy. Both the fine and cost shall be due within 5 days of the Board's approval of this consent agreement. Counsel for Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. is in attendance today to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any comments from Greenwood Gaming at this point?
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Brian Schroeder, Schroeder. I'm the Assistant General Counsel with Parks Casino. Quickly, I'd like to do a set of introductions. To my left, and your right, would be Martin Doyle, our Vice President of Food and Beverage. Next to him is Gerald Fretz, our Director of Security. And on the end is Anthony Franca, our General Manager. Parks does not dispute any of the facts stated by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. However, before I like to hand it over to Director Fretz to give you some information about what we've done to remedy some issues with underage, I want to point out one specific fact that we both agreed, OEC and Parks, in the consent agreement. When the underage individual was in the Pennsylvania State Police offices, they removed an object from their back pocket, was laminated, reflected light. They then put it underneath their sweater and finagled it a little bit longer at that point. Parks believes very strongly that was a fake identification that she used to enter the building. OEC's position is there's not sufficient evidence of that. And from there, that's part of the reason we're going to hand it over to Mr. Fretz to describe some things we put in place.
Good morning, Chairman, gentlemen. Since that time, we've placed some physical barriers to funnel the individuals to the central point of the entryway. In addition to that, when we have minimal manpower, we continue to funnel to the point where we have it down to about a 10-foot area. We've also requested additional ID scanners to be placed at each entrance. We currently utilize one for the front 2 entrances and one for the west entrance. We've ordered 2 more. In addition to that, we've increased our manpower footprint in the lobby area to reflect some of the more busier times in the casino.
And that increase in man hours is approximately 80 to 90 hours per week.
Any other comments?
No, Chairman. Any questions?
Any questions or comments from the board? Commissioner Fite?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Mr. Schroeder, approximately how many guests do you have in your casino on an annual basis?
Anthony, Jerry?
We could see 5,000 to 10,000 people on a given day. Over the course of the year, millions of people will come through our facility.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments from board members? They have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc., as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. This next consent agreement arises from an incident whereby a patron of Parks Casino was served alcohol to the point of intoxication while actively gaming in violation of board regulations and Greenwood Gaming's signed statement of conditions regarding its approved compulsive and problem gambling plan. On September 19, 2015, at approximately 9:20 p.m., the Parks Casino Surveillance Department notified the Bureau of Casino Compliance that a patron had been asked to leave the property after being identified as being intoxicated. The Bureau of Casino Compliance's review of the incident showed that the patron was served 15 alcoholic beverages between 2:33 p.m. and 8:28 p.m. by 3 different beverage servers, while she gamed at the same 4-card poker table. Throughout the time that the patron was consuming alcohol, the patron was also actively gaming. Parks' alcohol service policy guidelines state that as a rule of thumb, patrons are not to be served more than 2 alcoholic drinks per hour. This rule of thumb was violated by Parks Casino beverage servers on multiple occasions during the patron's visit to the casino. The Office of Enforcement Counsel conducted a compliance conference with Parks Casino on June 24, 2015, regarding 7 other instances where Parks Casino patrons were served alcoholic beverages by casino employees and subsequently escorted out of the licensed facility for signs of visible intoxication. On May 12, 2016, the parties entered into a consent agreement to settle this outstanding compliance matter. If approved, this would be the second consent agreement entered into with Parks Casino regarding an intoxicated patron. The terms of this agreement shall include a provision that Greenwood Gaming Entertainment shall immediately reinforce existing policies and provide training, guidance, and reinforcement of its employees to minimize the opportunity for a similar incident to occur in the future. Further, Greenwood Gaming Entertainment, Inc. shall pay a total fine of $15,000, and in accordance with the board's billing policy, Greenwood Gaming Entertainment, Inc. will also pay a flat fee of $2,500 in investigative fees. The civil penalty and fees shall be paid within 5 days of the consent agreement being approved by the board. Once again, counsel for Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment is in attendance today to answer any questions.
Any comments?
Chairman and Commissioners, we take alcohol service at Parks Casino very seriously. All of our servers and bartenders are tips trained. They're not allowed to work until they receive their certification, and they must have their recertification done before they're able to enter the floor again to serve alcohol. In addition, in this situation, the 2 servers of the 3 that violated our alcohol awareness policy received progressive discipline. And finally, in addition, both Tom Bonner, our general counsel, and myself met with OEC on our alcohol policy and how we apply it in extremely strict uniform application, which results in a lot of people being found. In this case, the policy was followed correctly in the sense that the table games dealer identified a problem, reported to their supervisor. Their supervisor notified security. Security immediately came over to assess the person, determined that they were intoxicated, removed them from the game immediately, escorted them off the floor, got them a safe ride home. Any additional questions, I'll be glad to answer, as will anyone at this table.
Any questions from my fellow board members?
One. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dustin, I think in your testimony you stated that surveillance notified our gaming office that there was an intoxicated patron that was escorted off of the gaming floor. Is that standard procedure for all intoxicated patrons in all casinos?
I don't know if that's the procedure in all casinos, but it's been the procedure at Parks Casino.
Okay, so once surveillance is notified, somebody is intoxicated, they immediately call our office.
All the casinos have some level of someone who is responsible for contacting the casino compliance representatives in the casino when an intoxicated patron is identified on the floor.
Okay, and then you come into the scene and do your investigation and then determine whether...
Actually, the compliance people at the casino
write up their report.
Backtrack.
Okay.
And determine whether or not the individual was playing and how much alcohol was served to that individual and so on. That report then comes to us, and then from there we take it.
And this is, I'm going to editorialize here. I am personally very concerned with the recent passage of the law that allows casinos now to serve alcohol for a fee 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I will just, not picking on you, but you're here, just send a shot across the bow to all the casinos, and I know they monitor these hearings, that this is going to become a much bigger issue. People are going to leave bars at 2 o'clock, leave nightclubs. They're going to want to continue to drink, and the place of preference is going to be your house. And this is going to be, I suspect, a bigger problem down the road. So I know you have procedures in place. That's great. But just kind of a message, request, whatever you want to call it, to really be on the lookout. Obviously, these fines are, come out of your bottom line, and I think they're going to increase because people are going to come into your facility after 2 o'clock.
I can say, not that I defend the industry, but I can say that every casino has in place, through their compulsive and problem gambling plan, to detect or to attempt to detect individuals that come into the casino already intoxicated, and they've been pretty successful at that.
Good.
So from that standpoint, I just think it's a matter of being more vigilant after 2 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you.
Commissioner Fight, just to piggyback onto that, we do keep track of our numbers, and approximately, I would think about 30. We've stopped about 30% of the people from entering, for appearing visibly intoxicated, and get them out of our building before they even enter it.
Sorry, 30%?
People that we identify as intoxicated. So it's probably you're looking at maybe 10 to 20 people we stop a month, approximately, and turn them around the door.
Are there other questions from board members? Because I have one.
No.
I'm not even sure who to address this to, so I'll try your general manager, but whoever's the right person. Maybe I didn't follow this. This individual was playing at one poker table during this time period? Is that what I heard?
Yes.
What responsibility does the dealer or dealers that would have been working during that time period have, not so much about whether the person appears to be intoxicated, but being aware that the person has received 15 drinks? I'm trying to draw a distinction between signs of visible intoxication and I understand you rotate dealers. There's a lot of other things can come in here, but it would seem to me 15 drinks being served to a patron at the table, whether they're showing signs of intoxication or not, unless you guys are watering the drinks an awful lot, that person is drunk. And I want to understand what responsibility or what training prior to somebody keeling over dead drunk, the dealer at the table or some other security people would be aware of just sheer the number of drinks that are being served. I'm not sure who's the best person to answer that.
It is absolutely. You're absolutely right about the rotation of the dealers does create some challenges, but it's absolutely everybody's responsibility in the facility to be on the lookout for people that are intoxicated. The rotation of the dealers and them going on breaks, there could have been different dealers throughout the time that the person was there, which does make it more difficult to quantify the total number of drinks that individual has received. So you point out a good point. It's a good point, and we have to be extra diligent in the training of all of our employees and reinforce these the things that they look for in the tips training.
Let me just follow this for another minute. This really, I'm not trying to single you guys out. I agree with Commissioner Fight. With 24 hours of alcohol now becoming available, these incidents are likely to become more common, and it's going to put all of us here and in the industry in a position of having to be more vigilant.
Well, in regards to
let me explain the question so you can, to the best that you can, try to answer it. If there's a dealer working at a table and he's been dealing for a half hour, an hour, and he knows that a woman or a man has had 3 drinks, when he goes off on rotation and the new person shows up, does he say, by the way, patron number 3 over there has already had 3 drinks or 4 drinks? Is that something that would happen during a rotation?
Before Anthony addresses that, I want to point out one, I don't want to say conflicting, but a tension that exists. And part of the tension is our dealers and supervisors are trained to protect the game and the assets of the game to make sure the rules are followed, that no one is cheating.
Right.
They also should be concerned about alcohol service as well. We emphasize they are watching their game, watching the hands being dealt, watching the people with their chips, because quite frankly there is a lot of cheating that goes on. We emphasize that when they're dealing the game, they're to protect the assets, protect the table, and protect the rules. And the supervisor also does that. It does not mean that it's not also their responsibility to follow the drink, but there is a tension that exists between their responsibilities while they're on the table right there dealing it, as well as a supervisor who's overseeing 3 or 4 tables at a time. But to your question, I'll defer to Anthony to answer your specific question. I just wanted to point that out, as you were talking about it, it came to my mind.
Just so you're clear, I'm not trying to single out the dealer. Is there somebody else who would be observing if it's not the dealer?
That was good.
We would want our dealers to tell their supervisor if they've noticed someone's had multiple drinks, absolutely. So if they're going off the game for a break, I would hope that they would tell their supervisor, listen, for the incoming dealer, just know that this person had so many drinks, and we want to be as diligent as we can possibly be.
But is there a policy in place that requires that sort of activity to occur when there's a shift change or when somebody goes on break?
The policies would be governed by our TIPS training, which is predominantly looking for signs of intoxication. If they see someone that is looking intoxicated in any way, or they've noticed someone that's had multiple drinks over a certain period of time, they should notify their supervisor.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Wasn't it the dealer that reported this to their supervisor?
Yes. So I was going to suggest that Martin Doyle is our Vice President of Food and Beverage. He could speak to the service part of it, the cocktail service as well, not just Andy would speak to the dealers. So I think if Martin could talk about the training that the servers get as well as their responsibilities, that would be helpful, I think, for the board.
Sure. I mean, the servers, every beverage server is pre-shifted before service. And we always talk about responsible alcohol service. We always talk about exactly what to look for and what the policies and procedures should be afterwards if there is somebody, deemed to be slightly intoxicated, whether we slow them off, back them off, or cut them off. So the policy is that they would go to one of the beverage shift managers, who in turn would go to the table game supervisor. So then we would keep an eye on that person, that particular person.
You have more on that?
Yeah, I was just pointing out that in this case, it took a while, but the table games guy kind of came in.
Well, that prompts another question. The same question I had about the dealers. I assume similarly your servers are rotating in and out. This took place over several hours. If whoever's the server goes off shift, does she tell her supervisor, by the way, on table 16, I've served that guy 5 drinks?
They've been absolutely trained to do that. Whether it happens 100% of the time or not is because most of the time people don't stay put at a single table, that they bounce around also. So in this situation, the person did stay at the table. It should have been done a little better.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? I appreciate it. I have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the board issue an order to approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc., as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
The next 7 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the revocation of 5 gaming permits and 1 non-gaming registration, as well as the suspension of 1 non-gaming registration issued to individuals by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the complaint. The individual named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each individual. Thereby, all facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for board consideration. In each instance, we'll read a brief summation and request the appropriate board action.
Once again, Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter today is a request for revocation involving Mackenzie Calixte. Mr. Calixte was employed as a security officer at Parks Casino and permitted as a gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint to revoke Mr. Calixte's gaming employee permit due to his felony conviction for burglary and criminal trespass on November 13, 2015. This time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the board to consider the revocation of Mackenzie Calixte's gaming employee permit.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Mackenzie Calixte's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter is a request for revocation involving Johanna Rivera Aponte. Ms. Rivera Aponte was employed as a table games dealer at Parks Casino and also permitted as a gaming employee. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed an enforcement complaint to revoke Ms. Rivera Apane's gaming employee permit after she came to work on September 17, 2015 in an intoxicated state and made numerous errors while dealing cards at a four-card poker table, resulting in Parks Casino losing $170 over the course of 38 minutes before Ms. Rivera Apane was relieved of her duties. Ms. Rivera Apane was terminated from Parks Casino on or about October 21, 2015 for failing to show up for work and is not currently employed at any Pennsylvania casino facility. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel would ask the Board to consider the revocation of Johanna Rivera Apane's gaming employee permit.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of Johanna Rivera Apane's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Thank you. Glenn Stewart for the Office of Enforcement Counsel, STUART. Next for the Board's consideration is the revocation of Hawaa Van Wynn's gaming employee permit. While working as a dealer at Harris, Philadelphia, Mr. Wynn paid out several losing wagers to a patron who had not won the hand. Mr. Wynn paid out these losing wagers to the same patron over a 3-day period. In total, Mr. Wynn paid out over $3,000 in losing wagers, which he should have retained as the dealer. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the Board revoke the gaming employee permit of Hawaa Van Wynn.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the revocation of Hawaa Van Wynn's gaming employee's occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Board. John Crowe, CROHE, for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter is a request to consider the suspension of Charles Inquartano's gaming permit. In January of 2016, Mr. Inquartano was charged with 3 drug-related offenses after swerving into oncoming traffic while operating his vehicle, failing a sobriety test, and being found with narcotics and drug paraphernalia in his vehicle. Mr. Inquartano is currently awaiting a formal arraignment. OAC now requests that the Board suspend the gaming permit held by Mr. Inquartano.
Questions or comments from the board? I have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the suspension of Charles Inquartano's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the Board. Benjamin Farrell, Ferrell. The next matter for your consideration is the revocation of Nelson Winder's non-gaming employee registration. On June 13, 2015, Mr. Winder was arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance. After Mr. Winder was found in possession of 5 bags of marijuana while working on a shift at Sugar House Casino. At this time, OEC would request that the Board revoke Nelson Winder's non-gaming employee registration.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the revocation of Nelson Winder's non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Board, good morning. Kim Adams for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter for the Board's consideration is the revocation of Jeremy Ansetti's gaming employee permit. Mr. Ansetti was charged with various criminal offenses, including possession with intent to deliver and theft charges. All of his criminal charges are still pending. The Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting that Mr. Ansetti's gaming employee permit be revoked at this time.
Questions or comments from the board? I have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board issue an order to approve the revocation of Jeremy Anisetti's gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the Board's consideration is the revocation of James Benzakowski's gaming employee permit. While employed as a slot supervisor at Mohegan Sun Pocono, Mr. Benzakowski stole approximately $26,000 from the casino. He was criminally charged and his charges are still pending. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting the Board revoke Mr. Benzakowski's gaming employee permit.
Questions or comments from the board?
Just one question, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in the facts of this case in that the counting machine, there didn't seem to be a, how do I put it, a true-up between the auditing of the machine and the internal auditing department at the casino. Is any discussion going on with the casino on this matter?
Well, we do have a pending investigation into this matter and several other matters that have occurred over time, particularly at Mohegan. So, if you take everything into context, figure this individual, by our calculations, was stealing about $146 over 179 days. Okay, so this individual, there were 494 days in total that this was going on. He worked for approximately 355 of those 494, and he stole on 179 of the total of those days. If you average it out across the slot machines, it comes to about 6 cents a day per slot machine. So that's looking for a needle in a haystack, assuming that you know a needle is there. So that the revenue, the audit of that would have to look for a variance and take into account the different variables that go on every day. So I'm not going to say it's impossible to catch, but you have to notice a consistent pattern over time. Because the individual could sign off on the slip without anybody verifying, and because it was such a low amount that he was signing off, until somebody would have noticed something like they did in this case, and then hindsight being 20/20 going back and tracking, it's a little difficult on a day-to-day basis to look for something that you know may or may not exist. So yeah, there are some discussions. There's an investigation. There's also, we're going to look at what we can do to ensure that we work with the casinos to detect these matters quicker. But in the grand scheme of things, when you consider that Mohegan Sun is bringing in somewhere in the neighborhood, an average GTR during this period, over $590,000 per month, and per day, and this individual is taking $146 per day. It's one of those things where a variance, you look at the variance and say, okay, that's within the normal scheme of things. That variance, that ebb and flow is not out of sorts. So it's a lot harder than it appears. We know it goes on, and so the important thing is when we catch individuals that we prosecute them, and we do everything in our power to ensure that we're working with the casinos to prevent something like this from happening.
From your recitation of the facts and the calculations you just gave me, I have every confidence you're involved in this up to your elbows.
We're knee deep in it right now.
It would just seem to me, however, that internal auditing at the casino, with the slips of paper that are signed off and handed in, specifically go back to an event at a machine specific or some sort of directed point.
Right.
And
so you have to take the balance from the main cage.
Correct.
And then look at the slips from each slot machine. Okay, and then balance out that slot machine. Now, for whatever reason, you have other variables that come into play too. Is a slot machine set a certain percentage way above the theoretical payout, where you expect certain things to occur, and that's within that normal variance of that particular slot machine? But I mean, it would take somebody consistently going through this every day and making sure everything balances out. When it doesn't balance out, go and pull the play from that machine and see what happened and see who signed what, when, and where. And like I said, he spread it out over time, so he didn't do it every day he showed up for work. So,
but $26,000 is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money for one individual. In my opinion, they should have gotten caught earlier. I would have thought within 90 days, something like that. You looking back and then determining whether or not something is out of sorts. But you put people in certain positions to do certain jobs, and you hope they do those jobs. in the end where somebody is motivated to do the wrong thing. Where there's a will, there's a way, but eventually they do get caught because they get comfortable and they do it over and over and over again. It's just one of those situations where I think it went on a little too long before getting caught.
Would the Office of Enforcement Counsel be notifying other casinos of what occurred here and recommending that they look into their policies to see if they're able to determine a pattern or some sort of internal audit process to ensure that this doesn't happen at the other casinos?
Yeah, I don't even think it would be us, because the casino compliance representatives at each casino, they talk to each other. The surveillance, the security at each casino, those directors, they speak to each other. So they know when something is going on, and they'll say, look, this is what happened at our casino, and that word gets around pretty quickly. Like I said, it's like sometimes it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, and you're looking for an employee that may or may not be doing something on any given day until you see that pattern, and until you go back and look at your books. Sometimes it takes a little longer to catch, but yes, to answer your question.
Thank you.
I'd like to follow up. I'd like to follow up a little bit, Cyrus. You said 179 events, correct?
Right.
The way we first read through the materials, it was the money reader that failed in one of the machines. The lady put in a 20 and it didn't register, so he filled out the form to give her the $20.
Right.
Now, are all 179 of those incidents occurrences where the money reader failed, or was this just a guy forging a form to get the money? Because we had a concern that why are all the money readers on these machines failing? Because that's money that goes to the central computer. The GTEC would see that now all of a sudden, if we have 179 incidents where these machines aren't reading those dollars, that's tax revenue that's not coming to the Commonwealth. And there's 179, I don't know if it's one machine or 179 different machines that aren't reading these dollar bills, or is this guy actually forging paperwork, making up that the machine's not reading the the dollar bill or $20 bill that's going into the machine? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. We were looking at whether or not he was targeting only machines that had bill validator problems, or is he just writing up slips whenever he felt like. If I had to speculate, I would say he was targeting machines that had a problem. So unless and a machine that maybe he knew was registering a high amount of play and or a high amount of jackpots or lack thereof. And if the bill validator doesn't read a person's bill, okay, so then you have a slot person come over, they have to verify it. Okay, the meter readings are not affected by that bill not being read correctly. So Commonwealth, we get our money, because we get our money off the top. Who loses money in this instance is that casino, who then he writes up this slip, and then he walks over to the cage and says, hey, I need $100. He gets $100 from the casino. He goes back, gives the person 20, and he pockets out 80. We get our money off the top from the readings within the casino, within the slot machine. That's not to say we don't care, because we don't want our casinos to fail. So by him taking this money from the casino is putting the casino in a financial, or like causing a financial problem for the casino. So I'm speculating. So our investigation, part of that is to see, did the Commonwealth lose any money? The other part of that is to ensure that, okay, if there was a way that an internal control fix or some kind of fix that could occur to where they should have been auditing more frequently, or auditing from the standpoint of the machines, because the machines is failing too often, that should send a red flag. But
sure,
I mean, you got 2,300, over 2,300 machines across the floor, and one fails today and another one across the floor fails 2 days later, and he's writing up a slip. It's all a matter of looking for a pattern and seeing something consistent. Like I said, this was over a 494-day period that this was done.
I mean, I know there's enough accounting to worry about. It seems simple enough in my mind, and it may be much more difficult to reconcile that machine. If there's a lot of slips, these casinos, there should be a red flag even on the casinos end, that if you have all these slips coming through where you're paying out money because of the machine's not reading, it would be fairly simple to reconcile that to the machine, because you're going to have X amount of dollars in that machine where, you know, the variance of that $20 or $100 or whatever it is going to show up with the amount of money that's actually in the machine, as opposed to what was read by the machine.
You're absolutely correct. And I think that the average win per day per machine was $253 during that period, okay, of time. So if he takes $146, and that's to say whether or not he was doing it for only one machine. He might have been doing 100 here for this machine, and then tomorrow or 2 days later do 20 for another machine. The important thing to remember is that if we could put something in place that would say, okay, for every time you do a slip, somebody's got to verify. Yeah. But that would bring the casino operations at such a halt and put us at such a competitive disadvantage that we do more harm than good in
it's
that
not worth
situation.
$20, but if it's $26,000, it's worth $26,000.
$26,000 over 494 days. I mean, you take in consideration what I forget it was. I mean, what Mohegan takes in, but if you look at it from a monthly per day basis, you know, 590,000 versus $146.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, this is not anything new to the industry. This goes on. We know it goes on.
Thank you.
Other questions, board members?
If I can, Mr. Chairman, Cyrus, to a layperson, these are very sophisticated machines. Does it surprise you that if what this individual was doing was just taking advantage of problems with machines, does it surprise you that there would be that many bad readings by bill counters in a slot machine?
Well, see, Commissioner Ryan, I don't want to. It's easy to sit in hindsight and say, oh, you should have caught this. But when you're in the thick of it and people are running all over the place and you have machines that are, you know, that may have a problem here or there, you know, in the grand scheme of things, no, it doesn't surprise me. But that's one of the things we want to look at to see, okay, was there some inordinate amount of bill validator breakdowns going on? And if so, why? But if across the industry, if it's average for this to be happening, I mean, it looks bad on paper because this one individual got away with $26,000. But if you take a casino's daily operations and everything that goes on in this casino, I'm not going to say it's virtually impossible to catch anybody, because nothing is impossible, but it's a matter of determining the pattern of your employees and the pattern of an individual. This individual, we later found out, well, the state police found out, you know, he did it because he was hooked on Vicodin, and he was using the money to purchase Vicodin. So it's about knowing your employees, and there were enough people in the casino that knew about this and should have said, hey, he's hooked on something. But it's a matter of knowing your employees and knowing their patterns, knowing their behaviors, and then following through and say to people in accounting, the people in surveillance, the people in security, hey, keep an eye on this guy and let me know if you see anything suspicious. So one of the things we're going to look at is, in the grand scheme of things, did it make sense for those breakdowns to occur?
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Cyrus, coming from a white-collar background myself, I prosecuted cases involving bank embezzlements where people are stealing 4 or 5 cents out of 100,000 accounts, and of course no one's ever going to notice, right? So I understand if you spread it out and you do it small, you can get away for a long time. But you know, I'm relatively new here. Have we had other actionable cases in the time that you've been here involving similar crimes, whether it's $26,000 or $5,000?
Oh yeah, we've had. I mean, but there are always different schemes to everything. Usually it's with the comp. I mean, I know the board has done a number of cases with free play involved and comps, and they find ways to manipulate that.
Have you seen one like this before? Have we ever done one of these before?
Not to my knowledge that I can recall. I would say that this is our first big one of this nature. We've had people steal 100 here, 100 there.
Sure.
Yes. But for this amount of time, so that's what concerns me about this, that he was able to do it for so long.
Well, here's a question, and I'm not sure it's for you, because I think you've said that you don't think it's the Office of Enforcement's appropriate responsibility in a formal way to educate other parts, maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, other parts of the agency. I guess my question is for you, Kevin. When we find an event like this, what systems internally do we have in this agency to make sure, whether it's 26,000 or when we find a pattern, how do we know that Jerry Stoll's people, whatever, are aware of what happened in this one casino, so they can start to look for patterns elsewhere? Do we have any kind of internal systems that guarantee? It's one thing to say the CCRs talk to each other. That's nice, but if they don't happen to talk, and how do we know that what happens in one casino it puts other casinos on notice?
Chairman, the coordination is between Jerry Stoll's unit and Cyrus's unit and the assistant enforcement counsel here at the table. When that report of the arrest came through, then that arrest, you read the report, it discloses as much of the scheme as they know, and at that point it is the BCC's responsibility to look at what facilitated that criminal activity. Was there a breakdown in controls? Where were the red flags that should have been identified by casino personnel? And I know that that process has occurred, and that's what's before OEC now in the investigative stage, which if there is a failure of the casino to detect this event earlier, then there's an accountability on the casino as well, and there could be an enforcement action come the subsequently.
But in terms of our own internal systems, to make sure this kind of information gets into the hands across 12 casinos, with our people being aware of this, I'm troubled by the idea, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth here. That it's kind of word of mouth sort of thing, and we have to depend upon people just like talking to each other, as opposed to having any kind of formal notification process in place to make sure that when a particular scam shows up in one casino.
No, and I don't. It's not as simple as a word of mouth. I mean, the report is there.
Yeah.
Jerry Stoll informs his people, look, we had this occur here. This is the report number. We can all pull the report. State police, I mean, they have their reports, which they give us access to when they're done with their criminal investigation. And they provide those reports to other state police personnel within the casinos. So it's not like, this situation or these schemes are flying beneath the radar without somebody in Presque Isle not knowing what occurred at Mohegan Sun. That's not the impression at all.
Okay, but I guess what I'd like then, and I don't want to put you more on the spot at the moment, I wouldn't mind if you would look into this and be able to tell the board in executive session, some of this I'm not so sure we would want to necessarily air in a public setting, don't want to tip off the criminals, as to exactly what our internal systems are to make sure that evidence like this is spread among our enforcement people and the people on the ground in the casino, as opposed to asking you to tell me what we're doing right now.
Certainly.
Okay? Thank you. I'm not sure where we are. I guess we have I guess I just need a motion then.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I move that the board issue an order to approve the revocation of James Benzinkowski's gaming employee occupational permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The remaining 12 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth or licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the Board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in each petition failed to respond within 30 days, as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Thereby, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. Once again, we'll read a brief summation of the facts and request their appropriate board action.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the placement of James Zukowski on the board's involuntary excluded persons list. While employed as a slot supervisor, Mr. Zukowski stole approximately $26,000 from Mohegan Sun Pocono. He is criminally charged and his charges are still pending. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Zukowski be placed on the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of James Zukowski to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the placement of David Cyphers on the board's involuntary excluded persons list. While as a guest in Mohegan Sun Pocono, Mr. Cyphers gained access to the back of house area, attempted to help other guests at a Players Club booth. Mr. Cyphers was criminally charged, and the charges have been resolved. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Cyphers be placed on the excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of David Cyphers to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next matter for the board's consideration is the placement of Thomas Johnson on the board's involuntary excluded persons list. While as a guest on Mohegan Sun Pocono, Mr. Johnson stole a jackpot in the amount of approximately $2,000 that belonged to another patron. Mr. Johnson was criminally charged, and those charges are still pending. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Johnson be placed on the excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Thomas Johnson to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the placement of Darius Petrovici on the board's involuntary excluded persons list. While as a guest in Mohegan Sun Pocono, Mr. Petrovici engaged in combative behavior with various security officers and actually struck two of the officers. Mr. Petrovici was criminally charged, and his charges are still pending. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Petrovici be placed on the excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Darius Petrovici to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter for the board's consideration is the placement of Charles Scalamonti on the board's involuntary excluded persons list. While as a guest in Mohegan Sun Pocono, Mr. Scalamonti stole another patron's wallet and various items from within the wallet. Mr. Scalamonti pled guilty to theft charges. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel is requesting Mr. Scalamonti be placed on the excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Charles Scalamonti to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter today is a request for placement on the board's excluded persons list involving M.D. Mola. The Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place Mr. Mola on the exclusion list for leaving a 6-year-old child and a 12-year-old child in his vehicle while he went inside Parks Casino and played slot machines on September 27, 2015. Based upon the foregoing, the Office of Enforcement Counsel asked that the board place M.D. Mola on the board's excluded persons list.
Any questions or comments from the board?
Mr. Chairman, is MD a first name?
Yes.
Interesting. Thank you. Maybe he's a doctor.
Have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of M.D. Mola to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Mola's name be removed from the exclusion list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next for the board's consideration is the placement of Tommy Fry Jr. on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Fry was caught stealing $100 in chips from another patron and capping a $10 bet while patronizing Harrah's Philadelphia Casino. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board place Tommy Fry Jr. on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board issue an order to approve the addition of Tommy Fry Jr. to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And next for the board's consideration is the placement of Hawaa Van Wyn on the involuntary exclusion list. Mr. Wynn paid out several losing wagers to a patron who had not won the hand while dealing Asia Poker at Harrah's Philadelphia Casino. Mr. Wynn paid out these losing wagers to the same patron over a 3-day period. In total, Mr. Wynn paid out over $3,000, which should have been retained by the dealer. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board place Hawaa Van Wyn on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Hawaa Van Wyn to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And next for the board's consideration is the placement of Tuyet Wynn on the involuntary exclusion list. Miss Wynn collected losing wagers which should not have been paid out to her while she wagered at Harrah's Philadelphia Casino. Miss Wynn's actions occurred over a 3-day period, and she collected over $3,000 to which she was not entitled. As such, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests the board place Tuyet Wynn on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Tuyet Wynn to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is the placement of Miguel Fields on the board's involuntary exclusion list. On February 22nd of 2016, Mr. Fields capped 11 wagers and pinched 3 wagers while playing Ultimate Texas Hold'em at Sugar House Casino. At this time, OEC would request that the board place Miguel Fields on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Miguel Field to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is a request to place Jason Thompson on the board's excluded persons list. Mr. Thompson illegally posted several bets while gaming at Hollywood Casino and was charged with knowingly by trick or fraud winning or reducing a loss. The status of this charge is listed as not final, and the Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board add Jason Thompson to the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Jason Thompson to the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The next matter before the board is a request to place Alicia Whitmer on the board's excluded persons list. Ms. Whitmer used another individual's Players Club account number to make 76 transactions totaling $2,998.75 without the individual's knowledge or consent while employed by Hollywood Casino as a server at the Skybox Sports Bar. Ms. Whitmer did not hold and was not required to be licensed by the board. The Office of Enforcement Counsel now requests that the board add Alicia Whitmer to the board's excluded persons list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
You sure can. Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue an order to approve the addition of Alicia Whitmer to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Concludes our business.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Thank you. Next, we have a public comment period scheduled. As I understand it, we don't have anybody who's pre-registered today to come forward and speak. Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to make any public comments to the board? Okay, that concludes today's meeting. Our next scheduled public session will be held on July 13th, of Wednesday, to begin at 10 o'clock in the morning. Are there any final comments, editorials, jokes, whatever, from members of the board or ex officios? May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is adopted. Aloha to Dick Jewell.